Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending upon your time zone. I'm David Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times, and I would like to invite you to today's program, Software Development at Home, Balancing Life and Retaining Compliance. Before we get started, I have a couple of brief housekeeping announcements. First, this is a live panel discussion, and we'll be fielding questions at the end of the talk. So to ask a question, just go to the questions tab in the control panel and submit it, and we'll answer as many as time will allow. Secondly, this talk is being recorded and will be available on demand in the resources section of sdtimes.com by tomorrow. Okay, so on to today's topic. COVID-19 has thrown the world a curveball and forced many people to set up workspaces at home. Some folks have had the luxury of already working at home and having actual offices there, and haven't been too badly affected from a work perspective. Others, like me, have had to carve out makeshift spaces in the deep recesses of our homes, dealing with things like poor internet connections in the basement, barking dogs during podcasts, and other impediments to work. So the challenge for these workers, of course, is to balance life and work, staying sane and healthy, and also having access to the applications and data that they need to do their jobs. So this makes organizations very nervous, of course, when it comes to security and regulatory compliance. So here to discuss these issues today with me are Scott Hanselman, Fletcher Heisler, and Sue McTaggart, and we'll have them introduce themselves. Scott, let's start with you.
My name is Scott Hanselman. I am a remote worker for Microsoft. I have worked remotely for 14 years from my home here in Portland, Oregon. I manage community for the developer division.
Excellent. Fletcher?
Thanks, David. Fletcher Heisler with Veracode, which helps secure the world's software. So Veracode is primarily on, a lot of our products are focused on code scanning and finding security flaws. We also have a big focus on developers, integrations, APIs, workflow tools. And I'm more on the developer side as the director of developer enablement. So I primarily head up one of our security training products, but also looking for ways to help engage developers in security overall. I've done a little bit of remote work on and off, a bit half and half, I'd say. But obviously I'm now in this bold new world along with everyone else, working from the couch.
Great. And Sue, why don't you tell us about yourself?
I'm Sue McTaggart. I'm the Senior Application Security Architect at Advantasure. I'm managing AppSec program end-to-end, supporting a team of developers, hundreds of developers worldwide.
Excellent. All right, so let's get into it, shall we? So just to frame the conversation a little bit, I know the pandemic has changed lives for many people who've had to set up shop at home. For me, it was kind of cool at first, being able to walk the dog in the middle of the day or run upstairs and grab a sandwich, do our first Zoom meeting, which seemed so cool. But then the distancing kind of felt a little isolated. You're working by yourself, you're not with the team. So it's, a little off-putting to not really know if you're at the same pace everybody else is going. There's nobody to talk to necessarily, of course, unless remotely. So Scott, let's start with you. What are you seeing and hearing from folks who, are home because their offices are locked down, and how are they holding up?
People have called me as soon as this started because I've been working remotely so long, and they've asked me for remote working tips. And I honestly have had to tell them that I can give you remote working tips, but this isn't remote working. This is quarantine working, and that's different. And they think that that's a weird differentiation. What do you mean by that? You've been doing this for years. It's like, well, but when I work remotely, I work here, I work at Starbucks, I go to wherever the Wi-Fi is, I go to my local sandwich shop, I sit in the park. The sense of being in this kind of white collar prison isn't the same. Stuck at home because you have to isn't the joy that remote working usually gives us. That's the first thing. The second thing that seems to come up is that people who don't work from home don't realize that their home network is optimized perhaps for Netflix in the evening, but not for the kids on Zoom calls, somebody on Netflix, you're on a call on Teams, and the entire network is saturated. People are discovering the limits of Wi-Fi. They're discovering the need for actual wired internet, which will save you. I encourage you all to wire up. All of those things have overwhelmed folks. So I think the first step is that acknowledgement that this is not normal, this is not okay, this is not representative of remote work. We've been thrown into a pile of remote work. I think we're doing okay, but acknowledging that psychic weight in the back of your mind about what's going on right now with the quarantine is the first step.
Okay, so I know that one of the problems that we hear from people who we talk to is that they're not sure if they're using their time well when they're working at home. You know, as I said earlier, in an office environment, everybody's working in the same direction, everybody's pulling as a team. Work kind of has a momentum to it. And when you're out of that, it's kind of hard to gauge if you're being as efficient as you could be, if you're keeping pace with the rest of the team. So I'm curious to know what can people do to stay engaged and enthused while they're working in isolation?
That is a really good question. I have found as a remote worker for so long that I think there's a thing called remote worker low self-esteem, which is basically the sense of, I don't really know if they know that I'm working. They might think I'm just hanging out. So there's this constant sense as a remote worker to over communicate, prove yourself, be more present. And sometimes that can cause problems because you then feel the need to be more present. Like, if I leave this room, at least I'll have my phone in case something important happens. So we tend to over communicate. And I think over communicating is a good thing. Being over connected is a bad thing. So while I'm remotely, I'm just make sure that everyone knows that I have done my tasks, whether it be on Slack or Teams. I let people know what I'm currently working on, but I do try to set boundaries. This spare bedroom is work, but when I'm not here, I try not to work. That part you have to teach your coworkers because they figure, well, we're all remote. We must all be working 24 hours a day.
Right. Yeah, I know that feels that way for me, for sure. When I'm sitting at home and you can't go anywhere and there's nothing else to do, you say, well, I'll just go back downstairs and do another couple of hours of work just to basically
We're
try to
actually
hold on.
later today, I'm going to be introducing the Microsoft Developer Division's interns. Imagine coming out of college, no graduation, and your first internship, you've never been there before. So you graduate in your one-bedroom studio apartment and you go to work for the big company in your one-bedroom apartment, and what that's got to feel like. The problem is that you and I assume our friends Sue and Fletcher, we can forget what we do when we don't work. Like, do we even have hobbies anymore? Look,
Right.
what would I, if I left, what would I even do? We have to give ourselves permission to feel that way.
Yeah. And so talking about balancing the work and life equation, I know before we came on, you were talking about sometimes you'll be on a podcast and a child will come walking in and want your attention or something like that. So you were saying before how that's actually okay. That's not a bad thing.
I heard a joke, I think it was on Jimmy Fallon, where he said, you know, the thing that's struck me the most about remote work is that Mike from accounting has a really ugly house. I think really what it really means is that we're all human, and it is weird to be introduced into someone's home that you've worked with for a decade, but never actually been in their personal space. So there's a couple of issues there. One, privacy and security. You certainly want to make sure that the things behind you are the things you want to be showing. That's why we have blurring backgrounds and virtual backgrounds in Zoom, because when I signed up to work here at the company, I didn't sign up for you to see my space and my kids.
Right.
But once I've made that security and privacy decision or not, the humanization of this, I think, is a really good thing. The idea that, yeah, so-and-so does have kids and they do have a spouse, and that person lives and works at their home and they are inviting us in there, so respecting that. And a kid entering a meeting it does not necessarily have to be a disruption. We've had lovely times when our vice president put her daughter on her knee and then just kept talking, and that's okay. So let's normalize that we are all humans.
Right. Interesting. I just want to point out that this is all I'm willing to show about myself.
I suspected as much.
When people are looking at the webcam, that's pretty much all they're getting. Yeah, so that's good stuff. I know, Fletcher, we were talking also earlier, and you were talking about the experience of having a bear wander up to your window up there in New Hampshire.
Yeah, we had an exciting team meeting that has, unexpected interruptions sometimes. There was a bear 5 feet away from me across the screen door, and that was most of the rest of the meeting. So, you just have to roll with the punches. So
I can imagine. Yeah. Well, at least you guys didn't turn into its lunch, so I guess
yeah,
that's
no
that,
actual punches. Yeah.
yeah, right. Very good. All right. So while we're on the topic here of working remotely, and I know for developers, many of them have worked remotely for a long time. And I know we've seen studies that show that if you want to hire younger people now, one of the requirements that they're looking for is the option to be able to work remotely and not have to show up at an office every day. And in fact, if two jobs are similar and one says you can work remotely and the other says you have to come in an office, more often than not, they'll take the job that says you can work remotely. So let me start with you here, Fletcher, and say, and Sue, I'll ask your opinion on this also. How has the pandemic changed the equation about that? I mean, it almost seems like now people don't have the choice, and businesses too are hiring people and saying, yes, you can work remotely. But is it, well, we'll work remotely for now, or we'll eventually bring you in? I know our company, as an example, we made a little transition. It was kind of tough. We print a magazine, so to not be with the graphic designer and be looking at physical page proofs and going, what's that all about? So that was about 2 months to figure out what software we needed to be able to make that work. So for other industries, perhaps developers, things like that, what have you seen, if anything, that's changed for them because of the pandemic that we're in?
Yeah, I think primarily a lot of these changes were already in motion and just got very, very accelerated. A lot more teams are just becoming much more remote, much more global, much more work from home friendly. And then one day they found out they have to right now.
Right.
And so there was obviously a big transition period, which is easier for some companies and some roles than others.
Right.
Developers are used to working online. Obviously, you can code from anywhere.
Right.
There are other things to watch out for there and other challenges, of course, but they're better suited than most. And likewise, Veracode, we're a SaaS company primarily. So with software as a service, we can still provide that without having that kind of direct contact and lots of travel. For other companies that do rely on actually having to go out and see a customer and visit a client site physically, you have to get a little bit more creative. So I think others have had some bigger challenges to overcome there. But I do think this shift isn't going to entirely go away once the underlying problems do. I think we're finding more ways to be more efficient, to be more flexible, and a lot of workers are finding, as Scott mentioned, this is quarantine work, not actual work from home work. They are finding some benefits, especially for those who have kids, have other family members to take care of. They've now got 3 jobs. But once that order is restored a bit, they'll probably want to maintain some of that freedom as well.
Good one.
Yeah, for sure. I concur exactly what Fletcher said, that in my operation, so many developers already been working from home. So there are some developers that went to the office, but it's not much changing because Adventure is also SaaS company where all the developer is in normal working remotely. So in my operation, the only changes that the increase of VPN bandwidth that we see over this pandemic. But other than that is business as usual.
Mm-hmm. Good. All right. So let me get back to Fletcher here for a second. So giving this transition to working from home, what should developers be thinking about in terms of security now? Is the thinking changing a little bit, or is it harder to just enforce policies that are already in place? What's been the situation?
Sure. So I guess there are two elements to security there. One is your own personal security and sort of your corporate security around lock your laptop, things like that. That's in some ways you have to worry less about because you're not taking your laptop anywhere. Hopefully, your significant other isn't going to jump in there and steal your emails.
Right.
But at the same time, whenever there is some issue that especially has economic consequences, unfortunately, we see more security issues as well. There are a lot of desperate folks trying to make a quick buck or take advantage of a situation. And so we are seeing more incidents. A lot of that is phishing related, especially when you can't just walk down the hall and double check something. So raising general security awareness there as well. I guess the other aspect of security that I deal with when it comes to developer security is the security of the code that they write. And so on that front, there's a lot of communication that gets lost if you're not very conscious about this process and this transition. Even if you were working remotely or sort of the remote equivalent, and from past personal experience, even if I'm in the same room as 3 other developers, we're probably going to Slack each other anyway. That's just how we communicate. We're used to that. At the same time, there is a lot of that extra conversation that happens that you might not even notice. And it might even be, hey, let's hop on a quick call and I want to chat about this particular topic. When you're going in web conferencing all day long, that's actually a bigger barrier now. I'm not quite sure when to interrupt, when to have that quick conversation, not sure it's worth your time. So that especially is true for security, where I might have a quick question about how to do something, or you might check over my shoulder and go, oh, did you know about this issue we had? And not even a code review, but more of a general, getting everyone up to speed on the same concepts, on the same trends. We're missing a lot of those pieces. So I think it's important to figure out what that process is, what the pieces are that you are missing. For every development team, there's going to be a range of experience. You'll have folks who serve a bit more of a mentorship role, and that's especially true in security. So I would say for teams that have sort of an embedded security champion, finding ways that they can help spread that knowledge still across their team without being interruptive, but still finding those opportunities to have the general chat, the quick check-in, ways to offer a little bit of advice in passing that still gets noticed and then not lost along the way.
Excellent. Great. So I know communication, you said, is a really big part of it. And again, when you're in an office environment, you can walk to the cubicle next to you or talk to somebody, they're there. To me, it's so frustrating when you send a Slack message, for instance, and you want a question answered right away, and the person just either isn't there or doesn't respond. And so I know there's a lot of that, and I think that probably is eating up a lot of time, and I think perhaps impacting work to a degree, in that you hit certain hurdles and you need somebody else to weigh in or to finish something, or what's the status of this, and you just don't get any response at all.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is a frustrating thing. I don't know how you overcome that.
Two quick things. One really specific practical, and then you can generalize this kind of advice as well. But we've been making more and more use. We use Slack very good, and we've been making more use of Slack integrations that will let you know with a little icon if someone is. Right. Previously, we mostly used it for working from home, but surprise, we all are. Right. But now they'll let you know if you're in a meeting already. Someone's on a call. I'm away from my desk, or I'm out on my stay-at-home vacation for these couple days. Right. That way you have a bit more quick indicator of, I won't get an immediate response from someone. Yes, right. We are in front of our laptops 24/7, but we don't have to be, and we don't have to be responsive all the time as well.
That's a good one. Okay, Sue, so let me ask you this question. So are there processes that you've followed that you can give as advice and maybe examples for some other companies that are challenged with keeping their teams together and engaged and on track?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, any activity, my advice, any activity supporting DevSecOps should be formally documented, because we want to make sure the processes and documentation is adapted throughout the DevSecOps community. Also, we implemented 2 years ago, where everything that we do process is being documented, and at this point our organization in a mature state where the process is being adopted throughout the DevSecOps community. Also, my advice to organization out there, if you have not done this type of documentation, I highly recommend to start processing documentation, so that everybody can be engaged following the rule. Like our organization, we are heavily regulated, where process documentation is a part of a high trust audit, and also continuously socialize and adapt these processes throughout the community, because there is some cases that certain team or certain people are in and out organization, so they are not aware whether or not there are a process that need to be followed in order for them to do their routine activity. Because one thing that we notice is, if in a security operation, if you don't follow the process, sometimes you have some miss, like configuration, for instance. So it is really important to have a checklist, to have a process documented, and I highly recommend for organization out there that have not done it.
Mhm.
And
Interesting.
one thing that I would like to add also, to create a centralized repository like a wiki page, there is a Confluent or SharePoint that you can utilize to create a centralized repository, so that all the DevSecOps community can access that page easily in one central location. So like my operation, I have a security processes linked to the wiki page, and I have security policy and a standard linked to a wiki page. Any proposed remediation or tip of remediation, there is a documentation, like they can just access it in one location. And developer is accustomed right now using the DevSecOps wiki page, where they can interact each other, providing each other feedback on the remediation. So it's kind of self-services. It is really important to have that, so that they can stay engaged among each other.
Good.
Yeah, one thing I'll add to that, I think it's important for teams, and especially for cross teams, to be using the same tools. I think a lot about this when it comes to sort of bridging the gap between the security team and the developments, where if developers are in Slack or whatever tool all day, that's ideally where security should be going, to make sure that those processes are followed and to provide updates and so forth. Likewise, if developers are doing most of their work in an IDE, or if they're doing a lot of that work through CI/CD flows in GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, wherever it happens to be, that is ideally the right touch point for adding in those processes and for making sure that those checklists are followed and so forth, rather than making someone go out to a brand new tool, or expanding the scope of the number of things that they have to keep up with and take a look at.
Right.
Sure.
So what happens, though, it seems that the security then kind of shifts out of your control a little bit, and you're kind of relying on the Slacks of the world and the integrations that they have with other things that will allow you to populate a document in Slack, or then notify somebody that happened, or what have you. And is going perhaps to a more all-in-one kind of a solution from one vendor that's probably way more secure, and I'm thinking of Teams here for a second, is that something that people might want to evaluate? Or you're
Well, I
saying
do
getting
think,
another tool is probably, getting them to learn a new thing with everything else in upheaval might be a little bit of a challenge.
right, there is a sense of sort of tool consolidation in general, and certainly at Verico we've seen that a lot of customers want a solution across the board for a lot of different problems that are related, so that you don't have a dozen different dashboards to check in on and reports to follow up on, so forth. I think part of what you mentioned of security kind of going out of your hands, that's just the joy and the concern of shift left. That
Right.
it's now more a developer's job or a shared responsibility when it comes to security. And so yes, some of it is out of your hands, but the best way to manage and maintain that is to have those shared systems rather than just hope that it happens somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and the reason, one thing that I like to have one solution. I used to be a developer when I have to interact with a security team that you have to scan third-party library in different tool, and you have to scan a dynamic in different tool. It's overwhelming. So it is. I understand the centralized tooling is really make developer work more efficiently. In my opinion.
Mhm. Great. So I'm just going to interrupt for a second because we have kind of an amusing question from one of our attendees who wants to know, Scott, what video game is in your background?
Sorry, that was my 12-year-old.
Ah, well, there you
That
go.
this is called a Mame multi-arcade machine emulator. It's an old 1980s arcade machine. I ripped the guts out, painted it, and put a PC inside. That is an air-gapped PC, so there's no security concerns because the only secure PC is a disconnected PC. One of the things I wanted to mention that from what Sue and Pleasure were saying, though, was that the DevOps pipeline, when you're at home, whether people are VPN in or not, there's a lot of this bring your own machine, and you don't know what's going to get into that pipeline and what could find its way out into production. So securing that pipeline is so essential, particularly when people are bringing their own PCs. So there's the pipeline as the code gets into DevOps, but then there's the whether or not we allow bring your own computer, which I have found to be
Yeah.
a lot of folks just left the office and ran, and they didn't bring their work computer.
Yeah, in our organization, our policy, bring your own device is not allowed to access our network. So it is something that we put control around that type of issue so that nobody can use their own device to access our network.
Very interesting. Okay, so I'm curious to know, I did a call with a low-code company yesterday, in fact, and one of the things that they are talking about is preparing your office for people to return. And one of the things that they're doing is a survey. And so well, what do you need to come back to work? Do you need a test? Do you need a parking space? Do you need, more a different computer, whatever? And they were doing surveys and then trying to respond quickly, to those needs. But one of the things that they found in this survey is that a lot of people are saying, well, I don't want to go back to the office. I've been working home now for a few months. It's great. And just leave me here. So what kind of pressures does that put on an organization who, shut everything down real fast? People fled. Now they want to stay home, and maybe they did some patchwork things anticipating everybody returning, but now they have to maybe harden those systems, solidify them a little more, secure them a little more. So what kind of challenges do you think that's presenting to organizations out there who are dealing with that? Anybody?
My initial reaction is that you just made me realize, let's just use the word virus in the general terms, right? Everyone's worried about what they're going to bring back into the office, and now we're going to go and bring computers back into the office that have been on what, Lord knows what networks, whether to Sue's point, whether they were bring your own machine or whether they were laptops that they brought back from work to home, used at home for months on their own network, and then came back. There's definitely a management challenge there. You can't Purell a laptop essentially at the hard drive level. So I wonder if there's any concerns from an information security perspective there.
Good point. Okay, so I'm going to turn to you now for a second and try to get some thoughts from you as what does the future of application security look like as the world changes and people are working differently?
Me specifically?
Well, I thought I would start with Sue, but you certainly could jump
Oh,
right in.
you said you. I was if you were talking about me or Sue. Please, Sue, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I think there is going to be a lot more AI into the CI/CD pipeline by more organization in the future. And I think also DevOps is going to be the driver of a security initiative. So there is a moving toward DevSecOps. So security responsibility is shift toward DevOps more.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I would add, with this shifting everything left into the developer's silo, the developers are going to have many more hats to wear, and those jobs will get easier but more numerous, where they're having to handle cloud security and cloud infrastructure now. They're having to handle, lead the efforts on AppSec because they're the ones using the latest, greatest language or framework, and so being able to stay on top of those kinds of topics and new skill sets will be really important, really across the board.
Yeah.
I would say also from a coding perspective, we're seeing more authenticated Git commits. We have YubiKeys now. All of our work that we're doing on GitHub is authenticated, not just through GitHub, but also through our Azure Active Directory. And then when I commit something to GitHub, it's verified with a YubiKey. So you can see on the commit that came from me. So there's a little bit of contact tracing for code commits as well. And I think we'll see more of that.
Interesting. So, all right, so back to Sue for a second, and I wanted to ask, what are some of the challenges now that people are going to have to implement an application security program with, things being as distributed as they are now?
The challenges that organizations commonly have, in my opinion, that security in silos, where the leadership doesn't have the visibility of the security posture. So the leadership doesn't have idea how to take action to current security issue or posture in the organization. So it is my recommendation to make sure that security is not in silo by having a security metric communicating to executive, so that they understand there is issue and the risk of the organization have, so that they can take appropriate action to support the business.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to remind our attendees now at this point, if they have any questions for our panel, now would be the time to submit those questions. So let me just kind of go back to Scott now and kind of talk a little bit more about the experience of working from home for people who aren't used to it. Like I said, I always use myself as an example because I'm probably the least prepared person ever in the world. And as I said earlier, I have just carved out this horrible little niche in my house because it's the only place that exists. So, without being redundant, I'm just trying to get more of a sense of, is this what it's going to look like now in the future? People are saying we can't wait to get back to normal. But is this now normal, that people are going to just want to stay home? And are we really seeing a major shift in how work is done?
I do think that we're going to probably see about 30 to 40% of people are just going to want to stay home because they're set up for it. One thing I would want to say, though, is that this is right now without end, right? It's interminable, and that's why it is so frustrating. If they said, David, work from home and you can meet us back in the office October 1st,
Right.
Okay, cool, I'm good. Now I know how long this is going to be. But the idea that you don't know if it's going to be August or January.
Right.
So what I would recommend to everybody, and this is more a psychological tip, and I'd be interested in what Sue and Fletcher think about this, is why aren't we nesting? Like you say that you just put together a little hovel in your house there, set it up. Take an hour, take a weekend, take a Saturday. What are the things on your desk that spark joy? What are the pictures on the wall? What is the, I mean, I just put in a little LED light so I can change my room lighting. This is a spare bedroom. It looks fancy, but these are just IKEA shelves and an LED. But in
Right.
doing that, it was a way of nesting and saying, all right, if I'm going to be in this room for a while, well, then darn it, at least it's going to be pretty, you know? If you're going to
Nice
be in
mood light.
that room for a while, I would encourage you to nest. And then when you do that, well, is the Wi-Fi upstairs? Are we going through metal? Can I get my wired? Maybe I need to go and purchase a little tiny hub because I've got a couple of the devices on my desk. What can I do to acknowledge and then improve my space while I'm in this interminable time?
Yeah, I'm also nesting myself, right? My routine where I used to go to the gym every morning prior starting working. Now I cannot do that. So what I did is buying the treadmill so that sometime I can be on the call and be on the treadmill. I'm buying the stationary bike so I can use it because I could not go anywhere. So my as well purchase that so I can do some exercise because it is important to have that balance while you're nesting.
Great.
Yeah, actually, Veracode announced to us just earlier this week that they were giving us a little one-time stipend for office setup at home, which, obviously there's a lot more to it than that, and we've done a lot more transition-wise to help support that. But I thought it was beyond just the monetary help, a really nice reminder of you probably had some setup in the office, and then you should take some time to make sure to replicate that as much as possible because you're in this for the long haul. Make sure that you're efficient and comfortable and able to get as much back to normal as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a blog post many years ago that was called Bed Back Buns, the Programmer's Priorities. You're going to be sitting in this thing all day. You're going to be sleeping in that thing all day, right? And then you've got to think about, is my bed comfortable? Is my chair comfortable? I got this Herman Miller chair on Craigslist. There's always a startup going out of business and you get to take their chairs. If you're sitting in an uncomfortable chair looking at a tiny monitor, spend the $100, get yourself a nice one, take care of your body, it will take care of you. So I like Sue's nesting.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, so we do have a question from one of the attendees, and they're interested to know what specific kind of reporting and scanning tools are being used to ensure security. And I guess, Fletcher, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So Veracode has a lot of different types of scanning, and obviously we're not the only ones out there. But I guess the way I would put it, we tend to think of sort of different levels of code. So at different levels of the software development lifecycle, I might be looking at my own code and starting with my code. Do I see any issues immediately pop up? And then with the team code, sort of our code, another set of scanning that's, this is less and less frequent, but more holistic in terms of what you're looking for overall. Are we seeing issues there? And then sort of at the policy level of what gets put into production, let's take a thorough pass of everything and make sure that there aren't any issues popping up there. I don't know if it makes sense to get into the details of the different types of scan, but just as a really quick preview, you could do static versus dynamic as an example, and so you might find very different things if you just look at code, the base level code base of an application versus if you go out to the end application itself and click around and put in a bunch of inputs and see what you can actually do with that end state. So a few different approaches to seeing what's possible there, and what flaws might pop up that way.
Well, that's great. That's great. All right, so it looks like we're coming up to time. So I just would ask each of you for a final takeaway or a final thought that you want to leave our attendees with here today. And then I know we have a slide we're going to be putting up later. So let's start with Scott, I guess, and we'll go around the horn.
I think that whether it be nesting and setting up your home office, or whether it be your application security lifecycle and your DevOps pipeline, what I'm hearing a thread throughout everything that Fletcher and Sue are saying is there needs to be intentionality. You need to be deliberate about it. To Sue's point, your C-suite execs need to have a scorecard. They need to know about the health of the system. They need to know about the security. Your devs need to know that they can check in their code. This doesn't just happen. This is done by deliberate practice. So whether it be something silly like putting an LED up on my wall so that I can deliberately feel better about my space, or whether it be really reasserting my code ingress process and my security processes, all of those things involve pausing for a second, acknowledging the situation, and taking action. So deliberate practice is my takeaway.
Mm-hmm. Good. Fletcher?
Sure. So I guess my takeaway related to that would be balance overall. So I mentioned I head up one of our security training products, which is sort of built around these interactive labs. And there's required training. There's also just some optional on-demand stuff that you can take. And we're actually seeing a lot of activity now in terms of evenings and weekends. And that's not because companies are mandating you need to do all this extra stuff. It's actually just a great time for professional development. Now, at the same time, at the company side, you want to make sure that you aren't overtaxing folks. You aren't expecting them to be working 24/7. So there might be some really great opportunities there for ways that you can be more productive. You can further your career or even other interests outside of work as well. But you have to make sure to maintain that balance and make sure that you have some time to turn off, take a bit of a staycation, make sure that you keep those reasonable hours. One thing we didn't mention that I think is pretty closely related, it's so easy to pop into a meeting. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't even get to walk down the hall. So make sure that you take those little breaks as well.
Yeah, or even schedule the room.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I will be echoing Fletcher. Just maintain the life balance. Make sure you plan your vacation with family, even though you cannot be in a crowded place. Go camping where is make you happy, and do exercise because you don't want your body feel like not able to support your mind, right? So I'm true believer when you taking care of your body, then your mentally it will be healthy too. So you don't want to be in the situation especially for now feeling a burnout. So yeah, take a vacation, take a day off, and rejuvenate yourself. So that next time you go back and resume to work with a fresh mind.
Mm-hmm. Excellent, thank you. So I know that we have a slide, I believe, that somebody is going to be putting up, so our attendees can know how to follow up and ask questions and how to contact you folks. And there it is. Okay, so let me just wrap up here and thank you all, Scott, Fletcher, Sue. Really interesting discussion. I hope our attendees got a lot out of it. And we appreciate your time, certainly appreciate Veracode for sponsoring today's event. And mostly, of course, we thank our attendees for hanging in with us this afternoon. And we certainly appreciate that. So until next time, I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times. So long for now.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everyone.